Welcome, Bryan Gillette, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Michael. Nice to see you.
Oh, of course. So today I have you on. You're an executive coach. Can you elaborate on what an executive coach does and how you help the world?
I'd be more than happy to. So executive coaches do a whole lot of things, but mainly what I focus on is working with leaders, generally leaders that are pretty strong at what they do, and helping them identify some of their strengths, some of their potential derailers, helping them be just a little bit more effective as leaders. And sometimes I'm asked to bring in and coach somebody who is not a really good leader, and they want to try to coach the person out of a problem. And I say that's generally not going to work, especially if the person doesn't want to work with an executive coach. Mm-hmm. So often I'm working with the leaders and, go through a number of assessments to help them kind of see where they are, where they're strong, and where they can take it to the next level.
And the assessments will help you understand where they're weak or where they need some backup. And then they kind of come to you and they just listen to what you have to say, saying, all right, you're weak in this area. Let's do these activities to make you stronger in this area.
Well, and it's less about kind of weak in this area, because there may be times when they have a certain skill. Maybe they're very passionate about something, and they've got a strong heart. They really care about somebody, and that skill's very important at times of being a leader. But it also can come across different ways. It can come across negatively, as it can come across as somebody being soft, come across as somebody not being driven enough. So part of what I want to be able to do is show them, here is how you come across as a leader. This is where you may be really driven, and driven can be a great component at times, but it can also have its drawbacks. So part of it is being able to show, here's your general kind of personality, your general leadership styles. And this is when it could be good in a situation. This is when it may not be good. And an example I often use, I do something called DISC, which is looks at 4 different styles of leadership. And there's other ones that I use. And one of them, somebody could be very driven. It's like, we are going to go this way. And this is, they may not be getting a bunch of people on board. And another style may be more compassionate and want to collaborate on things. And if everybody is in a room and there's a fire in the room, you probably don't want to spend a lot of time collaborating on which door should I go out. You want that person who's very driven and say, we're going out that door, follow me, let's go, as opposed to somebody that sits in the room and said, hey, should we go out this door or should we go out that door? You need speed at a certain time. A lot of times I'll do, if you're doing brainstorming with somebody, you want that person who can come up with the wild and crazy ideas. You don't want to evaluate those ideas. You don't want the analytical person coming in yet. And later you can get that analytical person. And so it's being able to leverage your skills, know where you're really strong, know where you might not bring certain skills, and where you may need to develop a little bit. But it's also being able to know, in this situation, I need to bring more of a certain skill. I've done a lot of acquisition work where I've acquired, a bunch of companies kind of with the organizations that I've been. And I'm involved in I've been involved in the due diligence and then the integration. And at times you need somebody who can just really understand people's concerns, their changes, because they've just found out they're getting bought by a company. And you need that person with a heart that can just listen and acknowledge. And then there are those times where it's like, hey, we need to get stuff done. Let's move. So you need to be able to balance out those different aspects of leadership.
I just came out with a blog probably some weeks ago at this point, and it's called Followers and Leaders. And leadership was always something that I was interested in, especially in the growing phase of my business. I believe it was like 2018, 2019. I was really diving deep into leadership because I was asking myself, what makes a good and effective leader? And I was thinking in my head, it's like, well, one day I'm going to be the boss and I'm going to have people under me. How can I be a boss that people are not going to look at and say, oh, this guy's a jerk, or I don't want to work for this company, things like that. And it's not so much of me being self-conscious. It's just me kind of going along with the idea of what I wanted from my company. I wanted my company to represent something that I would purchase, something that I wanted to be a part of. I wanted to be a part of a community also. So everything that I do within this company is exactly what I would want in a
Yeah.
company. So I look at the company as, would I purchase this? I, meaning me.
Hmm.
And I mean, I'm maybe picky, but I do like things a certain way. Leadership, being a follower, I mean, we can go so many different roads. If we can, let's dissect it little bit by little bit. Let's just start. What makes a good leader, really?
There's two of us on this conversation. I think if we were to both define a good leader, we'd probably get three different answers. And I don't think I could give you a great answer. It's like, this is exactly what follows a good leader. Because you look at somebody like an Elon Musk, who, if you've read anything about him or you know much about him, people could say, I would hate to work with him. And then there are some people, it's like, I would love to work with him. Steve Jobs of Apple. There are some people that loved working with him, but he was a tyrant. He was a perfectionist and he constantly drove, and he was really hard. But people loved what the outcome is. And so, you have to understand that there's so many different avenues of leadership. I was with a group of about 15 or 20 consultants a couple months ago. And we had brought three leaders in, two CEOs, and then one of the head of HR who was talking about her CEO. And we were just hearing from the three of them at different times about what great leadership looks like. And all three of them were very different. One of them just had this amazing heart, had this high EQ, was the type of guy that you would say, I would work for him in a heartbeat. And then the other two were people that it's like, I don't think I'd want to work with those two people. And what was interesting is when you look at their companies, one of them, the guy that everybody wanted to work for, his company on most metrics, most financial kind of view of them in the society is negative.
Mm.
Their stock had tanked. Financially, they were in bad shape. They'd been through a bankruptcy. The view from the public was extremely negative. You just rarely hear good things about this organization. He would be, the type of CEO we'd love to work for, just very heartfelt. The other two were much more driven, probably very low EQ, but in most major measurements, if you look at financial measurements, if you look at success of their product, if you look at kind of their perception in the community or in kind of both of them were nationally known, internationally known, I would say, they were highly successful. So, it gets me thinking is there's no right or wrong answer to what leadership is. Mm-hmm. And so that makes it challenging when people talk about leadership. It's like, okay, what's it mean to you? Maybe it means somebody who's got this phenomenal vision. I've worked with a bunch of leaders and who brought different things to the table. At the end of the day, I think it's the leader that knows what the organization needs and knows what the people in that organization need in order to get to where they need to get and can adjust their style. I mean, it goes back to the example I used earlier about, if there's a fire in the room, sometimes you need that leader that says, we're going out that door and go now. But sometimes you need that leader that kind of sits back and says, okay, Michael, what's going on? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it varies tremendously. I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts. When you wrote the blog, what were you thinking?
I think it's similar to like sugar and spice, where it's like you have to be spicy sometimes and sometimes you can be sweet. And it's not saying that you're going to be a pushover either. Mm-hmm. Now, when I was doing my research on leadership, I think I read like 7 books in the course of a summer. When I was done with that summer, I was like, okay, now let me find different leaders. So I found these charismatic people that were passionate about what they did. And they were good at what they did too. But they were almost like either you keep up or you're abandoned type of mentality, right? Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like, I'm going to make sure we can all get there together. It's like, if you get there, great. If not, see you later, right? So they had that type of mentality where they're very attractive, right? They're very magnetic. You look at these people like, wow, like this person is someone I want to follow. But then you finally are following them and then you kind of get a realization, wow, this is a lot more work than I was anticipating. And then I think that's where the negative connotations for bad leaders come into play, because they're weighing out what they're willing to do for a company versus what they are doing. And then that labels a leader a poor leader. Look at
Yeah.
Elon Musk, for example. He's a highly driven guy. If you don't do the job, he will find someone who does the job. But he's the sweetest guy. If you ever talk to him or to see how he is with his children, he's a good guy,
Hmm.
but he still runs a company.
Hmm.
So a leader is someone who's going to have to make those hard choices. And sometimes they're not going to be emotionally sound, right? So sometimes he might say, hey, you know what, guys, I understand, we've been burning the midnight oil this week, but let's do this, right? We are going to keep this up for 2 more weeks and we're going to hit our deadline. And then after, we're going to have some time off
Hmm.
because at that point, we have accomplished our goal. And then we can kind of ride the wave versus someone saying, guys, let's do our best. If we don't hit our deadline, then not a problem. We'll do the best we can. If we're a week over, 2 weeks over, $1 million over budget, don't worry. That's just going to be a sinking ship eventually. And then they're going to realize like, wow, I'm way in over my head. So a leader is going to be someone who can make those hard choices and know when to push, know when not to push.
Yeah.
So for me, I was a swim coach in college and then a little bit in my teaching career. I knew when to push a kid. I knew when to back off from a kid. Now, I will tell you in the beginning, I did not know this. It was a skill I had to learn.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, I was very assertive. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. The kids are exhausted. They're doing exactly what I am telling them to do, but they're burnt out. You can see their face is just drained. They're not having fun. And
Hmm.
then I was like, well, how can I make swimming fun? How can I make my lessons enjoyable and still be, effective? So they're learning, but they're also having fun. It was all work on me. I had to work on me. And once I figured out a balance and then learning how to read someone, I'm pretty decent at reading people. I can get a good understanding of where they are, where they need to be. So if a kid can give me more, I know how much I can get from them. I
Yeah.
know how far I can push them, but I have to understand that I have to build that trust with them.
I think that's great. And one of the things I really liked what you talked about when you're forming your company and you're thinking about, okay, what's important to me? The people that are going to buy my product, I want it to be like, that would I buy it? And what I heard in there is you're starting to form the values that are important to you, that you want in your organization, and the type of culture that you want. And I had done some work with the Great Places to Work Institute. If you're familiar with that, I think it's Fortune magazine every year puts out the Great Places to Work, the 100 Great Places to Work. It's 100 of you apply to be in it. You apply to be in one of that list, and it is a variety of different companies that make that list. And when you look at it, you look at kind of who are the leaders, and they are the leaders that are that driven, go, 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 to the kind of more of the heart. And as I started to dig, because I was looking to see if we could get on that list for our company. And one of the things that really stuck out as I dug deep is it's all about what's the type of culture you want. How are you reinforcing that culture? And how are you hiring and training leaders to support that culture? So if it's a very driven company that it's like go, 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 you're going to hire people that are go, 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 go. But if it's not that culture, you don't want to hire those people because you're going to have a culture mix or a mismatch. And so I liked how you were talking about that. And I also liked how you were talking about you could understand those kids and what was needed. And I think a good leader can see what a person needs at the time and be able to kind of adjust. So I often find it, and I have a degree in organizational studies. I have my MBA, and I spend a fair amount of time talking about leadership. And I have my undergraduate also another degree in communications. And people ask, well, what's good communications? And I can't clearly define what a good communicator is, what a good leader is, because it's so broad. So we can look at characteristics, and we can look at situations of, in this situation, this is the type of leader we would need. For this culture, this is the type of leader that we would need.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. And I agree. You're not going to want a leader who's going to be 100% every single day working at a kindergarten class, right? So
Right.
it's a total dynamic shift, right? You're gonna need someone who understands that personality group. If you're like in finance, where you're in a company that's very competitive and you don't like competition, it might not be the exact fit for you, even though you might enjoy the money that you get from it. It might
Hmm.
not be like personality, it might not be a good fit for you. Because if you don't like competition and you're in a highly competitive career, guess what? You're going to have to show up. And many people choose a career that they might not even know about. Let's look at high school, right? They leave high school and they go to college and they just pick a degree. They're like, all right, that sounds good. That's going to make me this much money. And
Hmm.
then they go for it and they realize, wait, this doesn't really, fit my script. Where I thought I wanted to do this, it seemed fun, but now that I'm doing it, I'm hating every single day. And many people get themselves into a rat race or a bubble, and they're like, all right, I can't change it. I'm already $100,000 in student loan debt, and I can't keep changing my major. So they stay in a job that they're unhappy with. And then that's the follower type of mentality that I go into in the blog, where people just follow someone, but they don't step up to a leadership role. They're like, well, this is my
Yeah.
circumstance. So the circumstance is basically what I'm talking about with followers. They
Yeah.
don't create more meaning in their career or what they do or what they will do. They simply follow to follow because it's the easiest option.
Michael, it reminds me kind of a long time ago in college, I was dating this one woman and I was talking to her mom, and her mom was a nurse. She'd been a nurse all her life. She was going to be a nurse the rest of her life, but she hated nursing. She just hated her job. She hated where she was at. And she was living in a place where there was one hospital. So there was one opportunity. I just saw how miserable she was, that she didn't feel like she could go do something different. And it would be hard for her to do different. I mean, she could, but it was going to be extremely hard for somebody to change in the middle, I would say toward the end of her career and do something completely different. And I thought to myself, I'm getting ready to come out of college. I thought, I never want to be in that position where if I hate what I'm doing so much, I couldn't go and do something different. Now, granted, there are times in your job where it's like, I just don't enjoy what I'm doing. And that happens. If that's happening every day, day after day after day after day for a long period of time, it's time to kind of look internally and say, okay, what can I do differently? But there are going to be those days that I just don't enjoy it. You don't want to run from that. But I always thought I never want to be in that position where if I hate so much what I'm doing, that I couldn't move and do something different. And so I always looked at, how do I position myself so I'm not in that position? And you get a little bit back to leadership. One of the things I talk to kids coming out of college when they're thinking about, okay, what company should I work for? And should it be a large company, a small company? And often the first thing I'll tell them is, I said, find a leader that you want to work for and that will pay attention to you and help grow you. I don't care if it's a small or a big company. There's benefits to both, but find that leader that is going to pay attention to you and kind of help you grow, and just hang on to them and stay with them as long as you can. Because if they're that good, they're going to rise and they'll probably take you with them. And then there may get to a point where you've learned what you've needed to learn. It's time for you to go somewhere else. But that, I think, is, the most important thing. If you've probably heard the saying, people join companies, they leave managers or leave
Mm-hmm.
leaders.
Yeah.
We join a company, it's like, oh, I want to work with Tesla, or I want to work at Apple, or I want to work, fill in the blank. And we think it's a great thing. And then we get, this leader we don't like. And it's like, oh, I'm out of here.
No, yeah, no, you brought up a very good point. And then I want to actually touch base on mindset. You said
Yeah.
something that many people will just pass over if I don't make it relevant. At
Mm-hmm.
some point in our life, we're going to have an epiphany. It can happen when you're younger, it can happen when you're older. It just depends. You might have to get some therapy or some coaching to kind of dig it out of you and say, oh, yeah, I remember this happened. And then okay, great. Now we know what you're supposed to be doing in life. You said that you had the epiphany when you were talking to your former ex-girlfriend. Her mom said, or she's miserable being a nurse. And you said, I don't want this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want this.
Yeah.
And now your whole subconscious mind is this. I don't want this. So now you have an unconscious motivator to not put yourself in that situation. Many people don't even realize that they do that. So there is a point in our life where we will get that at some point. For me, it's my father. He was an alcoholic. I told myself that I'm not going to be an alcoholic. Look what happened. I'm not an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, I could go have a drink with a friend or be a social drinker every now and again, but I have no drive. I have no ambition to do that. That is the same thing with a career. If you see your parents as miserable in their career, if you don't say, or, whether consciously or unconsciously, I don't want to be like my parents. Not saying your parents are bad. You just want better, right? There's nothing wrong with having better. My parents, we grew up in the ghetto poor, right? I talk about it all the time on the podcast. I'm not going to go too deep in that. But what they did for me was they set me up for success so I could be catapulted into a new spectrum of the whole generation of our family. I could change everything, but they had to have some type of sacrifice for me to do that.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't know that when I was younger. I only could see it when I was older. I didn't see the sacrifice when I was younger. I only see, oh, I'm without this.
And we don't see that stuff when we're kids.
we don't. I only saw what I didn't have rather than what I had. And then when I was older, I could appreciate what I had and then what my parents did for me. So we do have to dive deep and say, okay, where was that point in my life that I told myself that I'm not going to do this or I'm not going to be this? And then that's going to kind of guide you to the next step. And the next step is looking for that leader, right? Mm-hmm. You will have to look for someone who's a mentor, someone that's in a place that you would like to be, right? Because that's going to be the most effective way for you to get there in a manner where you can mitigate some failure. Failure is going to be a good thing. But if you're working with someone who has already treaded a path for you, you can go as far as you can with them, grow as much as you can with them. And then when you're ready to branch off, you have all of the skills, all of the knowledge you learn from this one individual or multiple people. If you're working for a big company with many great leaders, then you use that arsenal that you gained and then move on to start your own company, become a leader in your own regards. There's so many different avenues. And just one last thing that I'm going to hand over to you. My company or the logo for my company is a bird. And it seems so weird. Like, why is it a bird, right? When I was a teacher, my first year of teaching, I would go into school, teach, love these kids, right? They're amazing. I'm there with those kids for a whole year. Now the kids are getting ready to graduate. And I'm like, don't graduate, stay with me. You're great. I don't want you to leave. And then I had to kind of realize that even though they're so great and I spent all this time with them, they have so much more in life. What I wanted to do was kind of, instead of being like holding on to people that I've developed, I wanted to just kind of be open. And similar to how like a bird can just fly away or it can stay, right? So a bird has wings, it can fly if it wants to, or it can stay and hang out, right? Eventually the bird will leave the nest and fly away. So that's why I did the image of a bird. So I am teaching you, I'm helping you become a leader and become a critical thinker. And then when you're ready and you feel like I have enough already, I feel like I can fly and I can reach new heights now. And I say, go for it.
I love that. I look at that. I'm a dad. I have two boys. They're 13 and 15. And as our 15, he's a freshman in high school. And, in a very short amount of time, he's going to be going off to college and then he's going to be moving out. And it's going to be hard. My wife and I talk about this all the time, but our job, and it sounds like that's what your job as a teacher is. Our job is to prepare them so they can successfully fly out of the nest. Mm-hmm. And while it's hard for us, just like it was hard for you to see your kids go on, what grade did you teach, Michael?
I taught K to 12, so I did music.
Okay.
So I did everything.
Yeah. And so it's like, it's going to be so hard to see the kids move out, but that's kind of our job. I love the concept of mindset, which you were talking about. And there are those people that kind of look at like, I will let kind of fate drive where I'm going. Mm-hmm. And I don't subscribe to that. It's like, I will kind of drive. There are things that will intervene that will impact my ability to go, fully one direction or so, or may kind of push me out of the way. But at the end of the day, it's my responsibility to try to figure out where I want to go. And it's my responsibility to try to figure out how to get there, with the help of others. But I'm going to say, I want to go over there, and I'm going to chart a course to go there. I'm not just going to kind of let fate drive me wherever it takes me.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that mindset, one of the things I talk about in the book, and we can talk about this more later, is if you want to do really big things, figure out how to do them, and you're in control of them. We often put kind of these limiters in our head that may, like, I could never do that. Carol Dweck, who, if you know about mindset, about
Mm-hmm.
Carol Dweck and fixed mindset versus growth mindset. She talks about that fixed mindset is the person's like, I can't do that. I'm not a teacher. I'm not this, whatever. I'm not good at math. And they're going to be right. They're not good at math, or they're not going to be a good teacher, because that's what they think. Whereas that growth mindset is, I'm not good at math now, but I could learn and figure out, kind of learn it and get there. So I love that concept of mindset. I love that your bird analogy and kind of letting people go. Great concept.
Just getting into that growth type of mindset. Many people see a growth type of mentality and they say, oh, that's going to be good to get. But then they finally start to do the work to get there, and they have all that negativity, all those fixed mindsets kind of weighing them down. And self-doubt is going to be, and along with fear, is going to stop you from doing many things in your life. So we have to be courageous and in a sense, and push past our limits. And I know you touched base, but I want to dive in to your new book that's coming out. It talks about that concept of how to push past that, maybe the idea of I should stop.
So the book is titled Epic Performance: Lessons from 100 Executives, Endurance Athletes on Reaching Your Peak. And the epic, what that stands for is, how do you envision the big things, the E? How do you envision the big things in life, at work, in your career, whatever that you want to accomplish? And this is looking out 10, 15, 20 years out, looking long term. The P in epic is, how do you put a plan in place? So you think about, you envision the big ideas, you put a plan in place, and then you iterate, the I, to that plan. I use a running analogy is, if you want to run a marathon, you don't start off running 26.2 miles. You start off running 3 miles, and then you run 4 miles, and that's iterate. And then you run 5 miles. So that's the iterate part. C is, how do you collaborate with other people who've gone before you, successfully or even failed? And how do you learn from them? And then the last one is perform. So epic performance. How do you go out and do it? And the concept came from me. I did a 200-mile run around Lake Tahoe. So it's one of the premier kind of high altitude lakes in the United States. So it spans California and Nevada, so on the western side of the US. There's a trail that goes around it, and kind of bunch of trails that are put together, and it's 200 miles all on dirt. Your lowest elevation is about 5,500 feet, and you go up to almost 10,000 feet. So you have a lot of elevation, and you got 100 hours to do that. And so that big idea came to me. I did it. It was just this amazing experience. And the book started to form about, okay, how do I take this really big idea that a lot of people would say, I could never do that? And what is it that I did in order to get there? And so I understand what I did, but I also wanted to learn from 100 other people, predominantly executives. So, I interviewed, of the 100, about 75 of them were at the C level, CEO, CIO, CFO, or founders of companies. So kind of at the top of their career, or founded a company. And then the other 25% were ultra distance athletes, kind of very amateur athletes, but they push it. So an Ironman, or they've run 100 miles at the minimum. And so I wanted to understand, what is that framework? What goes through their head to think up the big ideas and then take it across the finish line? And so that's how the book came to be. And on a much smaller scale, which, my wife and I, about 4 years ago, we took our 2 kids. They were 9 and 11 at the time. I took them around the world. And we spent a year traveling around the world. And before we left, a friend of ours was having a going away party. And so there were a bunch of people there. And a number of people came up to us and a lot of people was like, oh, I think it's cool what you're doing. You're traveling for a year, you're taking your kids out of school. And they would say, I could never do it. And it killed me, because is it you could never do it, or you don't want to do it? Because if you want to do it, it's doable. And so part about is figuring out, how do you do it? What are the sacrifices you have to make? What are the things you have to do? Running 200 miles, most people aren't going to do that. Running a marathon, even like only 1% of the US population has run a marathon, which I found that number to be staggeringly low. But most people can run a marathon. But the question is, and a lot of people say, I could never do that. I was talking to a friend the other day who's training for a half marathon, and her response was, I don't think I could run a marathon. And my response was, I think you can. So it's how do you, and I said, you're going to run your half marathon and you're going to be fine. And then you're going to start thinking about the next marathon. So it's all in that mindset. And how do you shift it? As we come out of this pandemic, and if we were to back up 3 years ago and you were to ask kind of most CEOs, hey, what do you think about having all of your employees work from home? The response likely would be, oh, that's impossible. We could never do that. And in a matter of a week, what happened? We did what was impossible. I mean, I look at my kids in school. They, if I would have gone to the superintendent and say, hey, I think we ought to have every student go to class over Zoom, he would have said, hey, that's crazy. Now, granted, it was a long way from perfect. It didn't work well initially. It got better. I don't think it ever got to optimal, but it did get better every month. But it's like, there were a lot of things that were accomplished over the last 3 years that prior to this pandemic, we would have said, that's impossible. We couldn't do that. And we did.
And going in chronological order of what you spoke about, when you were at that party and people are coming up to you saying, oh, I couldn't do that. My brain as a mindset coach is saying, it's not that you can't do it. It's just that you never thought about it. Because many times people will think about something that's new to them and they go, oh, I can't do that automatically. It's just like a reflex for them, for their brain saying, wait, the reason why we didn't do it is because it's going to be a lot of energy. So we're not trying to use a lot of energy. So we don't do it. So that's the automatic response. Similar to how if you bump someone, sorry, right? We have conditioned ourselves to say that. Similar to how we would say, bless you, someone sneezes. We condition ourselves in certain things. Our subconscious mind is so powerful where we don't even know that we're doing things sometimes. And we create habits and routines, and we do have to understand our habits and routines if we want to make changes in our life. If you're struggling with change or to do something new in your life or to adventure off past your comfort zone, you have to understand your habits and routines. And then you have to figure out, do you want this in 5 or 10 years from now? And then start to make subtle changes that is not going to have your subconscious mind go in panic mode. And then eventually it just becomes natural. Similar to how you were saying, you don't run a marathon, a 200-mile marathon like this. You do maybe a 2-mile marathon or 3-mile marathon, and you build your way up. It's those building blocks that finally get you to that peak of running a 200-mile marathon.
Yeah. And that's that whole iterate part. And change is hard. Doing anything big is hard. That's why it's big. It's the hard that kind of makes it challenging. And so I often talk about or work with folks is look at things, do things that make you nervous. Because if it's making you nervous, it's probably stretching you into that uncomfortable zone. And when you get into that uncomfortable zone, that's when you start to realize that, hey, my limits are a little bit further, and you learn about that. I was working with a client. I facilitate executive retreats for organizations. And so a lot of times I'll pull an executive team together, and then we will put together their strategic plan. I kind of pull it out and help facilitate the discussion. And a while back, I was working with a client, and we put some of their ideas of what they wanted to accomplish in the next few years up on the board. And I kind of stood back and we were looking at it. And so I asked them, I said, do you think you guys can accomplish this? And they all kind of nodded their head and said, yeah, I'm pretty sure we can. And so I said, does this make you nervous? No, not really. My response was, then we probably need to go further. You probably need to make these little bit stretch goals. Because if this isn't making you nervous, if you think you can accomplish it, push it a little bit further. My dad, I remember I was 10 and every year we'd go on a ski vacation and we'd go someplace outside, a long way from where we live. We'd go to Colorado or Utah or Idaho. And we were in Breckenridge, Colorado. I was probably 10 at the time. And at the end of the first day, I come skiing down and I, in my mind, I look like an Olympic skier. Clearly I was not, but that's in my mind. I look like it. And I come to a nice sliding stop and I spray snow all over him. And I said, with the confidence of the greatest skier in the world, I said, I haven't fallen all day. And my dad compliments me on the form. And he says, you look good. And he's kind of made some comments to kind of, encourage me. And then he said, if you're not falling, you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough. Mm-hmm. So it's when you are falling that it's like, okay, I went a little bit too far, but next time I can kind of go that same to that same place and maybe I won't fall. And then maybe I can go a little bit further. But it's all in the mind.
Yeah. And it's that failure that we should seek, where your father understood well, if you want to be a great skier, you would try a more difficult course that would require a different amount of skill that you don't have quite yet. It's not that you can't have it or won't have it. It's just that you don't have it yet.
And I love that yet. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, we can't do it now, but maybe we can do it in the future. We just haven't been successful yet. I often think about, swimming when, the difference between swimming in the deep end and the shallow end is often mental. We go in the shallow end and that builds our confidence. And we learn the techniques in the shallow end. But then we look down at the deep end and we think, oh, I couldn't swim there. It's the same water. It's just, we don't have the ability to put our foot down. But if you can swim in the shallow end, you can swim in the deep end with the certain skills, but it's up here. And I remember my son, he was probably 7 at the time. And he was a decent swimmer. He could go swim in the deep end. And then we went down to Roatan in Honduras. And we took a boat out into the ocean and it was rocking a little bit, not much. And then we jumped out and you could see the bottom, but it was like 40, 50 feet down. Mm-hmm. And he was nervous about getting in just because this is a different world than the deep end of the pool. And eventually he did and kind of slowly got in and started to swim around. He stayed close to the boat initially, and then eventually he would veer off, but it's similar water.
When I was a swim coach, I would work with them in the shallow end so they can touch the bottom, get used to swimming, work on form. Now that they can swim, I know they can swim because I just taught them. So it's automatically, let's go to deep end. We're going to swim exactly the distance that I know you can. This is all understood, right? When we get into the deep end, they're like, I can't do this. The first thing I ask them is, who told you that? That's all I ask.
Great question.
Who told you that? And then if they think about it, I say, because I'm going to find this person and they're not going to like me because they're kids. Because then it was like, what, like, was it mom? And then sometimes they will look at mom or dad and mom or dad goes, was it me? And then the kid is just there like, yeah, it was me. Right. But they don't tell me it's me because I already told them. Once I find this person, we are going to have a conversation and it's not going to be a happy one. And then now it's kind of like that fear aspect of like, well, I'm not going to tell them it was me. So then we start doing it. And then it kind of goes away, right? We don't look on that aspect. It's just a wake-up call for them. Who told you that, right? Yeah. And most of the times it's going to be ourselves. We are our own obstacle in our life. Whether you're running a marathon or if you're swimming in the deep end or in the ocean, we are that obstacle. And what I love about the book is that you're bringing in 100 people who have had obstacles that they had to overcome. In order to be those type of leaders, they had to have obstacles. And I'm sure in your book, they talk about those obstacles that they had to overcome. That's just mindset. And then when we start to see when people do things, guess what happens? Our brain naturally understands, well, it is possible. I just have to do the possible. And it's the same story about Roger Bannister, the, sub 4 minute mile.
Yeah.
Everyone said, scientists said, if you run a sub 4 minute mile, your heart's going to pop or whatever burst. Guess what happened? Once he did it, everyone else followed in order and everyone kept beating everyone's record because guess what? Limits are in our mind.
Yeah. And now you have high school kids that are breaking the 4 minute mile. I love that story. I read a blog post a while back. This was years ago. A woman, but she wanted to ride her bike 500 miles. And she only, and I say this a little tongue in cheek, she only made it 312. Those were her words. She goes, I only made it like 312, 320 miles. And as she was being interviewed afterwards, she said, I only thought I could do 300 miles. And when I read that, it's like my heart just dropped because you failed before you started because you wanted to ride 500, but you only thought you could ride 300. So it likely wasn't your legs that went out. It was your head that just said, I can't go any further.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you look at these ultra distance events, and I've done a bunch, it's often people stop, not because they don't have enough energy left in their legs or their heart or whatever. It's because up here in their head, it just said, I'm done. Mm-hmm. I can't go any further. And that's the hard part.
Yeah. And we just have to learn how to not allow that voice or that thought rule us. I know for me, like when I'm in the gym, it could be on the treadmill, on the Stairmaster, swimming, where I'm just like, oh, wait, if I keep going, I'm going to be in rough shape or I'm going to die or whatever, going all the way to the extreme. I'm not going to die. But my brain doesn't know, right? It's that fight or flight type of thing, or your heart is just racing so much. And eventually you get used to it. But for me in the gym, what I do is I understand how to grow muscle. I know how to lose weight, et cetera, et cetera. So if I give myself a goal to do something, it's easy for me. Now, when I'm in the gym, sometimes let's say I'm doing some curls, just some bicep curls. And the typical set for me in the typical amount of reps is going to be about 4 sets, 12 reps. Now, sometimes I will get to 12 and I'm doing like a heavy weight. And I'm like, okay, I got 12 pretty easy. Do I stay at this weight or do I go up? Right. But then I'm thinking in my head, if I go to this heavier weight, I might not be able to get all 12. Well, that's a good thing because that means I failed to get my 12. And then now my muscles or my brain automatically knows this guy is a crazy son of a bee. So I'm going to make him stronger so he can get his 12. And the brain is going to give you what it needs or what the body needs. So if you demand quality, the body will show up in turn with quality. And the same thing is with business. The same thing is with your personal life, everything. If you want something in your life and you say, there's no other ultimatum, I'm going for this. Whether my body likes it or not, or my brain likes it or not, positive or negative, it doesn't matter. I'm going for this. And eventually your brain believes it. It's like, yeah, he's going to do it regardless. So we might as well give him the tools to get it done.
Yeah. And you know what? Your brain is designed to shut the body down before it does any long-term damage. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's one of the big functions of the brain is if it thinks, okay, this is going to do some long-term damage, we need to start shutting things down. And I remember I had a panic attack once and I had so many things going on in my head and kind of in my life at the time that were negative. I was speaking in front of a large group and all of a sudden I had a panic attack and it's the weirdest feeling. And what was going on, my brain was saying, hey, you have stressed your body and mind out too much. And by what you're doing now, we've gone over that limit. And so I'm going to start shutting things down for you. Mm-hmm. And so I had to go off the stage. And what I've learned, what I learned that was years ago is, all right, how do I manage that? So when that stress starts to come, how do I manage it in a more effective manner so my brain doesn't turn things off? And it's this crazy thing, but it's, we can, you can manage it through breathing, you can manage it through a bunch of things, but it's the brain's going to shut things off because it's the smartest part of our whole body. And it says, hey, you can't handle anymore. I'm going to say stop. Mm-hmm. And you look at any ultra distance athlete when they stop, it's generally because the brain said, hey, I think you're done.
There's so much to mindset. There's so much to being a leader, being an effective leader, to pushing ourselves each and every day, because our journey is going to be unique. And my journey is not the same as your journey. And I'm not here to bash anyone's journey, because it is your own journey. Because you have to understand, just because someone else has accomplished something great in their life, it doesn't mean you can't accomplish the same or better, no matter your circumstances. You hear about stories all the time from people growing up in rags and then all the way to riches. It's possible. We just have to deem it a necessity in our life, where similar to how you saw that nurse, your ex-girlfriend's mother, the nurse, you said, I don't want this. And you showed up. You didn't have it. You chose something more. So we have to start to ask ourselves a very powerful questions. What do we want in our life? And what will we do to get it? And I think what we talked about is exactly that, right? It's telling you your mindset, finding mentors, leaders that are going to help you. And the book that you have coming out, this is going to be a huge asset or a tool for anyone to utilize to help them understand or get their mindset kind of turning in that direction of it is possible. I just have to do the work. And if you don't know how to do the work right now, that's fine, right? I understand that. Get yourself a mentor, get yourself a coach. That's why Coaching in Session, we bring on all these wonderful coaches to talk about the work they do, and they can help you get to that next level. They can determine where you are and get you where you need to be, right? So that's the whole goal. We want you to be better. We want you to get to that place. You just have to take that first step. So if I can from you, Bryan, please, any last words? And then, of course, please share with the audience how they can find you.
I mean, one of the big things that I talk about in the book is, how do you go to that next level? You got to be able to see it. And it's pretty practical stuff on how do you get to, how do you break things down? You don't start, as I talked about, you don't start off running a marathon. You start off running 2 miles. And when you run 2 miles, 26 miles is the longest way possible. But then you get to 3 miles and you just build it up. I mean, that's how you break down fears. You have to really look at fears. And I'll often ask, if somebody wants to do something, they say, I can't. It's like, okay, you can't, or you don't want to. If you don't want to, I get it. But we can work on the I can't. So that's what the book's about. And I go into a lot of kind of practical ways to get to it. To learn more about me, if you go to epicperformances.com, so that's EPIC performances with an S.com, you can learn more about the book. You can learn more about me and connect up with me as well. So it's on it's on Amazon now. It gets published. It's in pre-order now until August 16th, and then the book's out.
All right, perfect. So I will have all of the links in the description box below, so anyone can easily find your book, your website, and then they can go from there. But I do encourage you to check them out, because I think we're at that point right now in our society, in our world actually, where many people have an opportunity to rise or to fall. And I encourage everyone to choose a higher path and to put in the effort and rise. So having an executive coach like Bryan is going to be, again, a huge asset in your corner. If you have a mindset coach, the same thing. We're helping you with your mind. We're helping you grow. And for me, I've had multiple coaches at once. And it's not that one coach didn't do one thing. It's that they all focus on a different area. You're not going to have a basketball coach teach you about soccer. Most likely, you're going to have a soccer coach teach you about soccer, right? Not saying that your basketball coach is a bad soccer player. It's just a different type of thinking, right? So you find someone in an expertise that is going to help you with that area, and then you go from there. But what you and I talked about, Bryan, today, a large amount of mindset, a large amount of wisdom, and anyone who has listened to this episode is going to know for sure, if they follow these steps and these guidelines and these nuggets of wisdom, they're going to be in a better place. So thank you, Bryan Gillette, for coming on Coaching Session. All the best.
Thanks, Michael. All the best. I love your podcast, Coaching in Session.